The morning light filtered in, thin and soft, stretching across the kitchen floor in long, pale stripes. The coffee sat untouched on the table, steam curling upward and fading before it reached her face. She sat quietly, elbows resting on the worn surface, fingers tracing the rim of the mug without thinking. There was a stillness in the air, the kind that only comes at the beginning of the day before the world remembers how to move fast. That's when the phone rang. A sharp sound that startled her in the quiet. She didn't move at first, just listened. One ring, two, three. She wasn't afraid of phone calls anymore, not the way she used to be. But even now, after all this time, she carried a small hesitation in her chest. The memory of too many bad news calls, the ones that changed everything without warning. Another ring. Long, insistent. She set the mug down carefully, stood up, and crossed the kitchen floor, her bare feet making no sound against the cool tile. The phone sat on the counter, silent and ordinary. She picked it up slowly, as if it might bite. "Hello?" Her voice was soft, a little rough from the morning. There was a pause, just a breath, and then a woman's voice on the other end, light and practiced but kind. "Good morning. Is this Mrs. Carter?" She hadn't been called that in a long time. It sat strangely on her. "Yes," she said, clearing her throat. "This is she. This is Miss Lawrence from West Hill Elementary. We were hoping you could come by this afternoon. It's about your son." The woman's tone wasn't heavy, not the thick, careful voice that comes with bad news. It was lighter, but still formal. "Is he all right?" she asked quickly, her hand tightening a little around the phone. "Oh yes," Miss Lawrence said with a small laugh. "Nothing to worry about. Actually, it's something good, something special." The words drifted across the line, gentle but vague. "We're having a ceremony today," Miss Lawrence continued, "and your son is one of the students being honored. We thought you might like to be there." For a moment, she said nothing, just stood there, the phone pressed to her ear, the words filling the air around her like slow-moving water. "Yes," she whispered finally, "I'll be there." Miss Lawrence gave the time, the address. She barely heard it, already etched into her mind, and then the call ended, the line clicking softly back into silence. She stood there a little longer, the phone still in her hand. The morning light moved slowly across the floor, painting her bare toes in gold. When she finally set the phone down, she wasn't smiling, not yet, but something in her chest was loosening, unfolding, like a paper flower dropped into water. She turned, glanced toward the hallway where her son was still asleep, his door closed, his breathing faint and steady through the thin walls. And in that quiet kitchen, with the soft hum of the fridge and the faint smell of coffee in the air, she let the moment settle inside her. A call she didn't expect, a ceremony she hadn't asked for, but maybe, just maybe, a small sign that the world was turning in her favor, after all. The school gym smelled faintly of floor polish and old wood. Chairs lined up in careful rows, parents shifting in their seats, the low hum of quiet conversations floating under the high ceiling. She sat near the back, not hiding, not quite, but far enough to see everything without being seen. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, the invitation crumpled slightly at the edges from where she had clutched it all morning. The stage at the front was simple. A heavy curtain pulled open. A wooden podium with a microphone that looked too big for the children it waited for. Her eyes found him easily. There he was, her son, standing among the other students in a line, fidgeting with the sleeve of his jacket. The jacket was a little too small now, she noticed. The cuffs riding up just a little, the buttons pulling tight across his chest. She made a mental note. New jacket soon. He didn't see her. Or maybe he did, but was pretending not to. He had that careful look on his face, the one he wore when he was trying to be brave, when he was standing at the edge of something new. She watched him breathe, shoulders rising and falling with deliberate control. Watched the way he shifted his weight from foot to foot, trying to look calm. They called his name. It echoed slightly in the large space, bouncing off the walls, filling the air in a way that made her sit up a little straighter without thinking. He took a small step forward. Then another. His shoes scuffed softly against the floor. One of the teachers handed him a paper, and he clutched it with both hands, not tightly but carefully, as if it might break if he wasn't gentle. He walked to the microphone, standing on his toes for just a second to adjust it. Then clearing his throat, small and serious. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees, holding her breath. He looked down at the paper, then up, scanning the crowd. And for a moment their eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't wave, but there was a flicker, a softening around his mouth, a tiny lift of his chin, as if to say, "I know you're here." She felt it like a thread stretched taut between them, unseen by anyone else. And then he began to speak. His voice was clear but small, the kind of voice that wasn't used to being this loud, this important. "My hero is my mom." The words hung in the air, simple, unadorned. She felt her throat tighten, her fingers curl harder around each other in her lap. He spoke of her. Not the grand things, not the things the world usually cared about, not success or titles, but the nights she stayed awake, reading with him when the power was out. The mornings, she packed his lunch even when the fridge was nearly bare. The way she smiled at him on the worst days, as if the world were still a kind place. Each word was a small stone, carefully placed, building something she didn't know he had seen, a monument made of all the invisible things she thought no one noticed. When he finished, he folded the paper neatly, tucking it against his chest, and stepped back. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the clapping began. Soft at first, then growing, filling the room. She didn't move, couldn't. Her chest was too full, not with pride exactly, but something deeper, something quieter. Her son glanced back at her one more time, just a quick look, and this time there was a smile. Small, real, meant only for her. And sitting there, in the last row of that creaking gymnasium, she realized he had seen it all. The struggle, the trying, the loving. He had seen it. And more than that, he remembered. The clapping swelled around her, a soft tide rising and rising, filling the big drafty gym with something warm, something alive. People stood, one by one, until almost the whole room was on its feet. But she sat still. The sound pressed against her skin, humming in her ears, but she barely heard it. Her eyes stayed on him. Her son, standing there so small against the heavy curtain backdrop, the paper still clutched to his chest. His cheeks were flushed, his shoes scuffing the wooden floor, but he didn't fidget now. He stood steady, soaking in a kind of quiet pride that was all his own. She felt it before she noticed it, the heat in her eyes, the slight blur at the edges of her vision. A tear slipped free, trailing down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away, didn't shift or hide it. She let it fall, warm and certain, tracing the lines time had etched into her face. All the mornings she woke before the sun, packing lunches with more love than food. All the nights she sat by his bed, whispering stories in the dark, because she couldn't promise him much, but she could promise him this, that he would never be alone. It was all here now, in this one fragile, impossible moment. He glanced at her again, and this time he smiled wider. The kind of smile that doesn't need words. The kind of smile that says, "I see you. I know." Her chest ached with the fullness of it. She pressed her hands together harder, grounding herself, feeling the rough skin of her palms, worn thin from years of work, of reaching for things she could barely afford to dream about. Around her, the applause softened, settling into the kind of clapping that feels less like noise and more like blessing. The principal stepped up to the microphone, saying something about courage, about inspiration, about young people leading the way. But she heard none of it. She was too busy watching her son, the way he stood, the way his eyes found her even in the crowd. There was no one else in the room, just him, just her. 1,000 days of struggle, invisible to the world, but not to him. He had carried them with him, had grown from them, had become something beautiful because of them. The applause faded. The ceremony moved on. But she sat still, hands folded, one tear drying cool on her cheek, a smile, small, sure, unshakable, slowly curling at the corners of her mouth. And in that gym full of folding chairs and scattered balloons, she made herself a quiet promise. Whatever comes next, we have already won. The crowd thinned slowly, the way it always does after ceremonies. Parents gathering coats, teachers stacking papers, children buzzing with leftover excitement. She stood quietly near the exit, her son's small hand tucked into hers, the warmth of it grounding her in the swirl of noise and movement. He was still smiling, still glowing in that quiet way he had. Not loud, not showy, but deep, steady. The kind of pride that doesn't need to be announced. She squeezed his hand gently, and he squeezed back, 2 small pulses, a language only they knew. Just as she turned toward the door, ready to slip away into the fading afternoon, a voice called out. "Excuse me." She turned, cautious. A man stood there, tall, older, with silver threading through his dark hair, a neat jacket, a kind smile that didn't feel rehearsed. She braced herself out of habit, for a question, for a polite nod and a quick goodbye, but he didn't offer either. Instead, he held out a simple, cream-colored card. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, voice low, careful. "I was in the audience, heard your son's speech." He didn't rush, didn't fill the space with too many words. "I run a program for women looking to start over, build something new. I think you'd be a good fit." She didn't reach for the card right away. She just looked at it. The neat lettering, the weight of the possibilities sitting there between them. His eyes stayed steady on hers, not pitying, not curious, just open. For a long moment she stood still, the way she always did when faced with things she hadn't dared hope for. The old voice in her head stirred, the one that said, "This isn't for people like you." But underneath it, something softer, quieter. "Maybe it is." She let go of her son's hand for just a moment, long enough to reach out and take the card. It was thicker than she expected, the edges smooth against her fingers. He nodded once, a small gesture, respectful, no pressure, and then stepped back. "If you're interested," he said, "we meet Tuesday evenings. Small group. Real work." She watched him walk away, disappearing into the crowd. Her son tugged at her sleeve, looking up at her with wide, curious eyes. She looked down at the card in her hand, turning it slowly between her fingers. The world had rarely offered her anything without asking for something first. But maybe, just maybe, this time was different. She slid the card carefully into her coat pocket, feeling its weight settle there, close to her heart. And as they stepped out into the cool afternoon air, the late sunlight spilling soft and gold across the parking lot, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope exactly, but the beginning of it. The building was nothing special. Brick faded by time, windows smudged, a simple wooden door painted the color of old pennies. No sign, no welcome mat. Just a number nailed crookedly above the entrance. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, hand resting lightly on her son's small shoulder. The card in her pocket felt heavier today, as if it knew how much it had taken for her to get here. Her son looked up at her, eyes curious but trusting. He didn't ask questions. He never did when it mattered most. She took a slow breath, the kind that scrapes a little on the way in. Then she pressed the door open, stepping carefully inside. The air smelled of old paper and coffee. The floor creaked beneath her worn shoes. Rows of folding chairs were set up facing a battered whiteboard. A few women sat scattered across the room, heads bent over notebooks, hands wrapped around chipped mugs of tea or coffee. Their faces were tired, but not defeated. Their eyes were sharp, but not cruel. No one looked up when she entered. No one stared. They just made space, quietly, as if they understood without needing to ask. She found an empty chair near the back, close to the wall, where she could feel its solidness against her spine. Her son settled beside her, small and quiet, his legs swinging gently above the floor. At the front of the room, a woman stood, middle-aged, tall, wearing a loose sweater and jeans that spoke more of comfort than authority. She smiled, not a practiced smile, not a shiny one, but the kind that comes from somewhere real. "Welcome," she said simply. No preamble, no expectations. She wrote a single question on the board. "What do you want to build?" The letters were a little crooked, the marker squeaking faintly against the surface. Around her, the women bent over their notebooks, pens scratching softly. She sat frozen, staring at the words. "What do you want to build?" The question wrapped itself around her chest, warm and frightening. She didn't know the answer. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But sitting there, in that room that smelled of old coffee and possibility, with her son's small hand finding hers under the table, for the first time she thought, maybe it's okay not to know, as long as you stay long enough to find out. She picked up a pen. The weight of it was familiar, grounding, and slowly, carefully she began to write. The walls of the room seemed closer today, the way they do when you're about to step into something unfamiliar. She stood near the front, a thin stack of papers trembling slightly in her hands. The kind of trembling you hope no one notices, but feel in your bones all the same. The other women sat scattered in the folding chairs, some with arms crossed, others with pens resting loosely between their fingers, waiting. Her son sat near the back, his small hands folded neatly in his lap, his face tilted up toward her, a quiet anchor. She cleared her throat, the sound too loud in the silence. Took a breath, then another, and she began. Her voice was steady at first, low, careful. She spoke about a cafe, not just any cafe, but one that would open its doors to people like her. Tired, trying, invisible to most of the world. A place to sit without being hurried, to breathe without being judged. But as the words spilled out, she could feel them slipping from her, like sand between fingers too weak to hold on. The ideas tangled. The sentences ran ahead of her breath. She lost her place on the page, fumbled for the next point, the next reason. Eyes blurred slightly, not with tears, but with that awful hot flush of embarrassment. When she finished, the room was quiet, not cruelly quiet, not impatient, just still. The woman who led the group, the one with the soft sweater and kind eyes, nodded, thoughtful. "You have heart," she said gently, choosing each word like it mattered. "But heart isn't enough to build a business. You need a plan." Another woman chimed in, not unkindly, asking about costs, about marketing, about how she'd keep the lights on when the heart wasn't enough to pay the bills. She nodded, tried to listen, tried to stay standing, tried not to let the heavy pit of failure settle too deep. When it was over, she sat back down slowly, her hands folding the stack of papers smaller and smaller in her lap until they were just a sad, crumpled ball. Her son said nothing. He just reached into his small backpack, rummaging for a moment, and then he handed her a piece of paper. Wrinkled, the corners soft, a drawing. 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, standing side by side under a crooked sun. Above them in big, messy letters, "Best, Mom." She stared at it for a long time, the uneven lines, the way he had drawn her hand holding his. She felt the failure press against her ribs, felt snow, but under it something sturdier, something older. The reason she started in the first place. She smoothed the drawing carefully against her thigh, folded it with gentle hands and tucked it into her bag the way you'd tuck away something sacred. Failure stung, it always would. But sitting there, the world feeling too loud and too quiet all at once, she made a decision. Not big, not loud. I'll try again. And this time, she would try smarter. The next few weeks passed in slow, heavy steps, the kind that don't look like progress to anyone watching, but to her, each one was a small rebellion against the part of herself that once believed she couldn't do this. She came back to the small room with the folding chairs, even when her hands still shook, even when her voice still caught in her throat, even when she thought she had nothing new to offer. She came back, and she sat, not in the back, not trying to disappear, but closer to the front now, notebook open, pen ready. She wrote everything down. Every question, every critique, every scrap of advice someone more experienced offered. At first, the words blurred together. Profit margins, cost analysis, marketing strategies. Strange, sharp things she didn't yet know how to bend to her will. But she learned. Late at night after her son was asleep, she sat at their small kitchen table, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the silence, flipping through her notes until her eyes ached. Sometimes her son would shuffle out of his room, sleepy and confused, his hair tousled. "What are you doing, Mom?" "Learning," she would whisper, closing the notebook and pulling him close. He would smile, small and crooked, and crawl into her lap, and for a moment she would just sit there, feeling the weight of him, reminding herself why the tired eyes, the sore hands, the late nights were worth it. In the sessions, she stopped flinching when someone asked a hard question. She stopped shrinking when she made a mistake. She started asking her own questions, started pushing back, gently but firmly, when she didn't understand. And the other women, they noticed. They stopped looking through her and started looking at her. Not because she was the smartest, not because she had all the answers, but because she showed up, again and again, with a notebook full of messy scribbles, with a heart that refused to stop learning. One evening, after a long, slow discussion about leadership, the woman in the soft sweater smiled at her, not a polite smile, but a knowing one. "You're becoming someone others will follow," she said simply. No ceremony, no applause, just a truth spoken quietly into the space between them. She didn't say anything in response, just nodded. feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones. Leadership, she realized, wasn't about standing at the front. It was about standing, even when your legs shook, even when your voice trembled, even when all you had left was the choice to try again. The bank smelled like paper and tired carpet, the kind of place where people kept their voices low and their hopes even lower. She sat across from a desk too large for the small, neat man behind it. His tie perfectly straight, his pen tapping against a stack of forms. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, her shoulders pulled in just slightly, an old habit she hadn't yet unlearned. The folder in front of her was thin, just a few sheets of paper, creased and worn from too many times practicing what she would say. She had rehearsed every word, in the mirror, under her breath as she washed dishes, whispered to the silence of her small kitchen when her son was asleep. Still, when she spoke, her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I'd like to apply for a business loan," she said, steady but quiet. The man looked over his glasses at her, not unkind, just tired, the way people get when they've heard too many dreams walk in and stumble out again. "What's the business?" he asked, flipping open the folder. "A cafe," she answered. Her fingers brushed the worn edge of the chair. "A place for people who don't have places. Somewhere warm, kind." He raised an eyebrow, not dismissive, just skeptical. The way a world hardened by numbers and profit margins tends to be. She didn't flinch. Instead, she told him about the coffee beans she wanted to source from local growers. About the long, sturdy tables where no one would be rushed out with a check and a glance. About the little reading corner she'd carve out for children. About the simple kindness she wanted to stitch into every part of it. She didn't promise success. She promised heart. And somehow, that was enough. The man nodded once, made a note on the form, clicked his pen closed. "You'll hear back in a few days," he said. She gathered her papers, nodding politely, her heart pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. But 3 days later, the phone call came. Approved. Not a fortune. Not enough to build an empire. But enough. Enough for a small place with mismatched chairs. Enough for a counter scratched by use, but polished by care. Enough for hope. She sat at the kitchen table that night, the approval letter spread out in front of her, her son asleep down the hall. The letter felt heavier than its weight in paper, heavy with all the things it promised, heavy with all the things it couldn't guarantee. She pressed her palm flat against it, closed her eyes, breathed slow. This wasn't the end of anything. This was a beginning, small, shaky, but real. She smiled to herself, a small, quiet smile, and whispered into the stillness, "Let's build something good." The morning came soft and cool, the kind of morning that smelled faintly of wet pavement and clean air. She stood outside the cafe before unlocking the door, key held loosely in her fingers, breathing in the stillness. The sign above the door was simple. No fancy lettering, no neon lights. Just her son's messy handwriting turned into a small, hand-painted logo. It made her smile every time she saw it. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of fresh coffee and something sweet. Cinnamon, maybe, or vanilla. The first batch of pastries she had stayed up too late baking. The tables were mismatched. Some wobbled a little, some carried old nicks and scratches, but she had polished them until they gleamed. Every chair had been carefully set, a small vase of wildflowers in the center of each table. Nothing too perfect, just enough to make the space feel like someone cared. She moved slowly through the room, running her hand over the back of a chair, adjusting the salt shaker on one table, smoothing out a wrinkle in the tablecloth. It didn't look like much to someone passing by. But to her, it was everything. A place built from sleepless nights and quiet prayers, from notebooks filled with clumsy ideas and the soft weight of her son's dreams tucked inside her heart. Her son stood by the counter, bouncing slightly on his heels, his good sneakers still a little too clean. He grinned when he saw her watching and gave her a small, shy thumbs up. She smiled back, slow, real, feeling the edges of her nerves smooth out a little. The first customers trickled in, neighbors she didn't know well but who nodded warmly. A woman from the flower shop down the street, a young man with a backpack and headphones slung around his neck. Marla came too. Her old diner apron swapped for a worn but neat cardigan, her face lit up with pride that she tried to hide but couldn't. They filled the small space with easy conversation and the gentle clink of coffee cups. No speeches, no grand announcements, just people, sitting at the worn tables, breathing life into a dream that had once been nothing more than ink on a wrinkled notebook page. She moved behind the counter, wiped her palms against her apron, and took the first order, her hands steady, her heart full. Later, as she stood by the window watching the afternoon sun slide across the floorboards, her son tugged at her sleeve. He pointed toward the tables, every seat filled, people talking, laughing, leaning close to one another. "Look, Mom," he said softly, "it's full." She knelt beside him, pressing a kiss to his temple, breathing him in, soap and sunshine and something still wonderfully childlike. "It is," she whispered, and in that moment, she didn't think about the loans or the risks or all the ways it could still fall apart. She thought only of this small room full of strangers and warmth, this quiet, beating proof that dreams, even the smallest ones, could be real. She stood there a little longer, just breathing it in, before slipping behind the counter again. Ready. The afternoon light had shifted, thick and golden, spilling across the worn wooden floor and climbing the cafe walls like soft music. Outside the large window, the street moved slowly. People walking, cars sighing past, the day stretching lazy toward evening. She stood behind the counter, wiping down the surface with small, steady circles, her mind half drifting, thinking about inventory, tomorrow's pastries, the quiet satisfaction of a good day almost done. The bell over the door jingled. Not loud, just a soft, familiar sound she had heard 100 times now. She glanced up, automatic, a small smile already forming, the kind she wore easily now, the kind built from real peace. And then she saw him. He stood just inside the door, the light from the window cutting a line across his shoes and up the side of his body. Older, smaller somehow. The sharpness he used to wear like armor was gone, smoothed into something heavier. A man worn thin by years, by choices, by regrets. His hands were in his pockets, his shoulders pulled in, not the confident, brash figure she once knew. His eyes, the same eyes she used to study and try to understand, didn't meet hers. They flicked around the cafe, the scuffed chairs, the wildflowers wilting slightly in their jars, the people murmuring softly over coffee. And then, finally, they found her. For a breath, the whole room narrowed. Just the two of them standing on opposite sides of a life she had built from the ruins he left behind. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, one hand resting lightly on the counter, her apron bedusted with flour, her heartbeat slow and steady in her chest. There was no anger, no sharp bitterness waiting on her tongue, only a stillness, a quiet recognition of what was and what would never be again. He took a step forward, hesitant, almost a flinch, and she watched the way he moved, careful, unsure. He hadn't come to cause trouble. She could see that. He had come because people, sooner or later, always returned to the places where they left their better selves behind. Their eyes met, just for a moment. No apologies, no explanations, just a silent exchange between the woman who had been broken and the woman who had built herself back. And in that quiet she offered him nothing. No smile, no anger, no welcome. Only her stillness. Only her presence. Only the simple, unshakable truth that she was here. Pfft. He shifted his weight, glanced once more around the room, as if searching for a place to belong and finding none. Without a word, he turned, the bell over the door giving a soft, final jingle as he stepped back into the fading day. She stood there a moment longer, breathing in the scent of coffee and warm bread, feeling the steady hum of conversation and life fill the space he had left behind. Her son's laughter floated from the back room, light and easy. She smiled then, small, private, and turned back to her work, the cloth in her hand moving in slow, sure circles. The past had come and gone, and she was still standing. It was near closing time when the bell over the door jingled again, softer this time, as if even the door knew the hour called for quiet. She glanced up, wiping her hands on a towel, and saw him. This time, he didn't just stand there. He stepped inside, cautious, the way a man does when he's not sure if he's welcome, or even if he should be there at all. She stayed where she was behind the counter, hands resting lightly on the wood, the towel folded and still between her fingers. He hesitated near the door, then moved toward a small table by the window, the one tucked into the corner, half hidden by a tall potted plant. The same table where she used to sit with her son after the long shifts, sharing leftover pastries, laughing softly over nothing. He sat down slowly, hands flat on the table, as if afraid it might vanish if he wasn't careful. She didn't rush, didn't pretend to be busy. Just watched him. The way his shoulders hunched slightly, the way he stared at the table instead of her, the way he seemed smaller than she remembered. Finally, she moved. Not hurried, not hesitant, just walked across the room and stood by his table, close enough to hear him breathe. He looked up. His eyes were different now. Not younger, not softer, but emptied out, stripped of the sharpness they once carried. He cleared his throat, rough, as if he hadn't used his voice in a while. "I messed up," he said. No excuses, no explanations, just those 3 words, falling heavy into the space between them. She said nothing, not because she didn't have words, she had plenty, but because none of them needed to be spoken. He glanced down again, fingers fidgeting with the edge of a paper napkin. "I lost a lot," he continued, voice low. "After everything. Thought I had more time to fix it. Thought I could find something better." He shook his head, almost laughing, but it was the kind of laugh that folds in on itself before it can reach the air. "I was wrong." Silence settled between them, not tense, not thick, just quiet, wide enough to hold the weight of everything they didn't say. He looked up again, and for the first time she saw it. The apology he didn't know how to shape into words. "I'm trying to start over," he said. "I don't know if you could help. Maybe give me a chance." There it was, the ask, small, heavy, dangling between them. She looked at him. Really looked, at the man who once left her standing alone, at the man who now sat before her, empty-handed. And in her chest, where old anger once lived, there was only a quiet kind of knowing. She could help. She could reach out, offer him a piece of what she had built from the ashes he left behind. But she wouldn't. Because help was something you give freely, not something owed, not something dragged from old wounds. She stepped back slightly, standing taller without even meaning to. "I'm sorry," she said softly, but not unkindly. "I have a business to run, a son to raise. I can't carry the past and the future at the same time." He blinked, once, twice, but didn't argue. He just nodded, slow, accepting. The way someone nods when they finally understand that some things are too far gone to be reached. She turned then, walked back toward the counter, the soft tap of her shoes against the floor, the only sound in the quiet cafe. Behind her, the chair scraped softly as he stood. The bell over the door jingled one last time. She didn't look back. There was nothing left there for her, only the steady hum of the life she had built, and the warm light spilling across the walls, and the small, certain weight of her son's laughter waiting for her in the next room. The cafe settled back into quiet after he left. The kind of quiet that feels thicker than silence, the kind that lingers in the spaces where words might have been. She stayed behind the counter for a moment, letting her hands move without thought, folding a cloth, wiping a clean surface again, adjusting a sugar jar already in place. Not because it needed doing, but because sometimes the hands know what the heart isn't ready to feel. The windows caught the last of the day's light, the sky outside slipping into that soft, heavy blue that comes just before night. She stood there, breathing slow, her reflection faint in the glass, not quite sharp, not quite blurred, just enough to remind her that she was still here, still standing. Her son's voice broke the quiet, a small, happy sound from the back room, laughter tucked between the pages of whatever book he was reading. She smiled at the sound, a real smile, the kind that started in the chest and worked its way upward. She thought about the man who had sat at her table, the man who had once left her holding more empty promises than she could carry. She thought about his hands, restless on the napkin, his eyes heavy with something that looked like regret but felt older, worn, thin by time. And she realized she wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. The hurt he caused had already done its work. It had broken her, yes, but it had also carved out the space where she had built something stronger. If she had let bitterness grow, it would have taken root deep, wrapped itself around her new life until nothing could breathe. But she hadn't. She wouldn't. Bitterness was heavy, and she was tired of carrying things that didn't make her stronger. She wiped her hands on the towel once more, folded it neatly, and set it aside. Then she moved, slow, certain, toward the back room, toward the small, joyful world she had built one quiet, stubborn step at a time. She paused at the doorway, leaning against the frame. Her son sat cross-legged on the floor, his head bent over a book, his face lit up by the soft golden lamp. She watched him for a long moment, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way he mouthed the words quietly to himself, the way he existed in a world she had fought so hard to make gentle. He looked up, sensing her there, and grinned. All teeth and brightness, the kind of grin that erases years of darkness in a second. She crossed the room, sat beside him on the floor, leaned in close. He pressed the book into her lap without a word, a quiet invitation to join him. And she did. Because this was what mattered. Not the past, not old wounds, not the man who had once walked away. Only this. The boy with ink-smudged fingers, the warmth of a small room filled with light, and the certainty that kindness, quiet, steady kindness, had carried her farther than anger ever could. The cafe grew, not in size, not in flash, but in ways that couldn't be measured by square feet or profits. It grew in heart. It started one rainy afternoon. She had been closing early. Chairs lifted onto tables, the floor swept, the last pot scrubbed clean. The windows shivered with the steady drum of rain outside, and the world beyond the glass looked washed out, quiet. That's when she saw her, a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, standing under the small awning, soaked through, clutching a worn backpack like a life raft. Their eyes met. The girl's gaze sharp and scared, the kind of look you learn to recognize if you've ever had to hold yourself together with nothing but stubbornness and luck. Without thinking, she unlocked the door again, the bell giving a soft, uncertain jingle. The girl hesitated, and then, slowly, stepped inside, dripping, shivering, but grateful. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. She just pointed to a chair by the counter, the last one she hadn't stacked, and said, "Sit, I'll get you something warm." It wasn't much, a mug of coffee, a plate of day-old pastries warmed just enough to steam in the air. But the girl's shoulders relaxed as she ate, hands wrapped around the mug like it was the only solid thing in the room. After that day, she kept a few chairs tucked in the back, not for customers, not for business, but for people like the girl. Tired, worn, carrying too much silence in their bones. The regulars got used to it. The way an extra plate would sometimes appear at a table, the way a pot of coffee would be refilled without a check attached. No one asked why. No one needed to. Kindness didn't need explaining. One day, she moved the tables, pushed them together into a long, sturdy row down the center of the cafe. A bigger table. Room for more. The kind of place where no one had to eat alone unless they wanted to. Where a cup of coffee and a warm smile could be enough to remind someone they still belonged somewhere. Her son helped, dragging chairs twice his size across the floor, laughing when they scraped too loudly. When they finished, he stood back, hands on his hips, surveying the work like a builder admiring a house. "It's good," he said. She nodded, smiling softly. "It's better," she whispered. The cafe didn't grow richer, not in the ways some people measure wealth, but it filled. With stories, with second chances, with the slow, steady weaving of lives once frayed and forgotten. And in the quiet moments, after the rush, after the doors closed and the lights dimmed, she would sit at the big table, running her hand over the worn wood, feeling the scratches, the dents, the soft shine from 100 shared meals. A bigger table, a bigger heart, a place built not for profit, but for people. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of slow, golden afternoon where the cafe hummed quietly under the weight of a full, warm day. The bigger table was full, voices low, coffee cups half empty, laughter tucked into corners like folded notes. She sat by the window, a worn book resting in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in a while. Instead, she watched her son. He was taller now, all elbows and quick feet, moving easily between tables, clearing plates, filling water glasses without being asked. But it wasn't just the work he did. It was the way he smiled at the older woman who always sat near the window, knitting soft scarves in slow, careful rows. The way he crouched beside the boy who came in every Thursday with scuffed sneakers and a stack of library books under one arm. It was the way he saw people, the same way she had once seen him, small, vulnerable, worth the whole world. Later, when the cafe had thinned out, when the chairs scraped softly against the floor and the air smelled faintly of lemon soap and something sweet still lingering from the morning's pastries, he slid into the seat across from her. His face was serious in the way that children wear when they're trying to be grown. But his eyes still held that wide, honest light she never wanted to see dim. "Mom," he said, voice careful, "I've been thinking." She smiled, set the book aside, gave him her full attention the way she always tried to. "I want to start something," he said, "for kids, like me." She tilted her head, waiting. For kids who need a place. Not just to sit or have coffee, but a real place. A place to learn, to be seen. He fidgeted with the edge of the table, nervous now, as if maybe it was too big a dream to say out loud. "I want to build a center," he continued. "For kids who don't have one yet. Somewhere they can come after school. Somewhere they're not just waiting to grow up. Somewhere they can grow right now." She watched him, his hands bigger now, but still unsure. His face open and earnest, and she felt it. The slow, steady bloom of pride that filled her chest so full she almost couldn't breathe around it. All the nights spent counting pennies and folding laundry under tired lights, all the mornings packed with hurried lunches and whispered promises. They had led to this. To a boy who dreamed not of running from the hard places, but of building doors inside them. She reached across the table, covered his restless hand with hers. "That's a good dream," she said, voice low, steady. "The best kind." He smiled, wide, unguarded, the kind of smile that cracks the world open just a little bit wider. And in that small, worn cafe, with its mismatched chairs and wildflower jars, she saw it clear as the sun outside the window. Her life's work wasn't the coffee or the tables or even the kindness stitched into every corner. It was him. Morning came soft and quiet, the way it does when the world is waking up gently, without rush or noise. She sat on the small stoop outside the cafe, a cup of coffee cradled in her hands. The mug was chipped along one edge, a small crack running down the side like a faint, faded scar. She liked it that way, liked the way it had held on. The street was still mostly empty, the sun just a smudge of gold behind the rooftops. She breathed in slowly, the cool air, the faint smell of baking bread drifting from the kitchen, the familiar creak of the wooden sign swinging above the door. Inside, the cafe waited. Chairs pushed in, tables wiped clean, the long table set just the way she liked it. Her son's laughter floated out through the open door, older now, deeper, but still threaded with the same lightness he'd had as a boy. She smiled, soft and slow, the kind of smile you don't even realize is there until you feel the way it warms your cheeks. This life, this small, ordinary, extraordinary life, had not come easily. It had come from nights spent pacing the floor, from mornings where she didn't know how to stretch the last dollar, from the silent battles she fought inside her own skin. It had come from believing, quietly, stubbornly, that survival wasn't enough, that she could do more than just endure, that she could live, that she could build, and she had, not just for herself, but for him. For every hand that reached for a second chance and found it waiting at a battered wooden table. She took a sip of her coffee, lukewarm now, but still good, and tilted her head back to feel the sun finally spilling fully over the street. The city stirred awake, a car engine humming to life, a shutter rolling up somewhere down the block, a bird shaking out its wings on a wire overhead. Ordinary sounds, beautiful sounds. She closed her eyes, let the light soak into her skin, and breathed out slow. No anger lived in her anymore, no bitterness, only the quiet certainty that she had made something good out of what was broken. Only the deep, unshakable knowledge that she was enough, that she had always been. When she opened her eyes, her son stood in the doorway, smiling, hands shoved in his pockets, sunlight catching in his hair. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She smiled back, lifted her mug in a small, silent toast to mornings like this, to everything behind her and everything still to come. Full circle. The end.